Welcome to A Little Bit Radical, a business podcast from Standing on Giants. I'm Rob, your host. Join me as I meet people and organisations who are doing things differently, challenging the status quo and, yes, might just be a little bit radical.
Did you order takeaway this week? If you did, you're not alone. In the UK, we order 6 billion takeaways a year, and a huge number of those are ordered on Deliveroo. Deliveroo is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year and now operates in 10 countries as one of the giants of food delivery. My guest today is Elena Devis, who is the former head of vegan category at Deliveroo, now working as a consultant in the plant-based space. Elena, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat to you, Rob.
Thank you. So if you are a little bit radical and you're on our podcast, so we know you are, what do you think in your early life set you up for that?
I think I've always had a very adventurous spirit. I started traveling by myself when I was 13. My parents used to send me overseas to learn English and to, meet people from all over the world. And I think that just started something up inside me where I just love to explore new ventures. I love to meet new people. I love to create. So I think traveling actually is what sparked my radical side.
Where do you rank yourself in terms of being well-travelled? How many countries, what percentage of the world have you seen, do you think? How much is left to go?
I lived in Australia for 3 years and I did quite a lot of the Southeast Asia, New Zealand, etc. So that side of the world, which is very, very far away. My husband's actually from Australia. I've been to a few places in North America and South America, and I still haven't been to Africa, which I would love to. So I'd say I'm doing pretty well, but I still have a long way to go. But you know what? The older I get, the less I want to travel. I think traveling was my way of finding myself in a way, and I feel like I'm getting there, although it's a never-ending
almost found
path.
you.
Yeah, almost. From now till my last day, I think it'll be almost. But yeah, love traveling, and I just feel like, especially with regards to food and business and finding your purpose in life, it's just so important to open yourself up to other cultures and people and ways of thinking. And I love doing that. Yeah.
That's quite a common theme on this podcast, actually, Elena. Lots of people point to either their travels or living and working in different countries, growing up in different countries. It just shows you that there is more than one way of doing things. And would you say that you've brought that into your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, being from Spain, as you can imagine, it's the Mediterranean diet where I'm from in Valencia is the main diet, but it's a very meat and fish heavy culture. And I remember when I was living in Australia, I lived in a shared house with 3 vegans. And that was the first time I actually heard the word vegan back in 2015. And so for me, that was what are these people doing? How are they not dying? You know what I mean? And it was a massive transformation of not only my way of thinking, but lifestyle in general. So absolutely, yeah, traveling and meeting new people and living in different places, I think is a crucial element of expanding our mental boundaries.
So you can track where your career has gone back to that moment almost, because you've become like a plant-based business guru, out there. And it all comes back to that moment in 2015 where you saw these 3 weirdos eating differently to you.
I'd say so. I'd never even talked about vegetarian diets. I remember my mom had a friend who was vegetarian, but she was the ultimate weirdo. Before then, I had literally never come across anyone. So that was a pivotal point in my life because they showed me the, classic cowspiracy, forks over knives, etc. And watching all those documentaries suddenly sparked something inside of me, and I started questioning my habits, and not just on a diet level, but across many angles in my life. So from a professional perspective, back then I had no idea plant-based would end up being such an important part of my career, but it just became so important to me personally because, I know there's many other pillars to my life, but for me, health is the number one because we're nothing without our health. And yes, I wanted to do better for the planet and better for the animals, but for me, it was the realization that there was this diet, or at least other habits that were potentially going to benefit me long term from a longevity perspective, but also more energy, less, like, being completely transparent. My stomach wasn't the smoothest. So like moving to a plant-based diet, the amount of fiber I was consuming prior to eating plant-based was none, practically. And so like so many things, I saw such great changes in my health, literally in a couple of months. And I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't super straightforward from the start, because my problem was that I first removed fish and meat without educating myself enough on what are the substitutes, what are the right plant-based proteins. And I was consuming some legumes, but tofu, I had never even tried tofu, tempeh, seitan, like none of those. So it took me a long time. I was eager to explore more. And then it got to a point where, it was probably early 2016. I was like, right, I'm going to make this a commitment. And therefore I'm going to study a plant-based nutrition course. I'm going to read, more like scientific books, etc., because my health is on the line, right? So I want to make sure I'm doing this right. And I think this is the actual only way to sustain a primarily plant-based diet long-term, if you're doing it right and you're ensuring that you're consuming the right nutrients, because otherwise it's impossible. I definitely agree that meeting those people changed my career.
Of course, that's very clear. You obviously have a natural curiosity for experiences, for learning new things, and the thing you went to was, right, I want to learn about this, I've got to study. Do you think as an adult, in general, you've become more radical or less radical? And what do you think's been behind that?
I'd say less radical, in that I think there's less ego in my decisions.
Interesting.
I've seen a lot of these in the vegan space where people have their convictions and they think it's my way or no way. And for me, my personal journey has been a journey of ups and downs, of exploring, of learning to accept the different stages of my life and how I feel about myself and my diet and people throughout all of them. And so I'd say I'm still radical in that I don't think I'm follow the pack or fit in most people molds. I have my own ideas and I make sure that I question them very regularly, but I confirm I'm less radical in the way I approach business, in the way I approach my beliefs, and in the way I interact with other people.
It's really interesting because I think most people would look at you from the outside as a kind of vegan business activist almost, and say, well, that's quite radical. I say that doesn't follow the herd. But you see it as you kind of calming down a little bit and being perhaps more realistic, pragmatic. Is that the right word?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think the theme in my life is that I cannot do anything professionally that I don't believe in personally. That's how I am. And so when I first started exploring the plant-based space, I was vegan. And so back then I had the conviction that we had to focus on driving the fully vegan sector forward, and tags were really important, which I believe still are, but it was more, we have to be true to this lifestyle and to this philosophy. And now it's like, hey, let's take a step back and meet people where they are, because let's not forget that ultimately we are all individual human beings in our own personal journeys, and no matter how passionate and how driven we are professionally, we are dealing with consumers and clients and individuals that are people in their own journeys, and they don't know as much, and they might not be prepared to do as much, and frankly, they might just not want. For me, it's been very eye-opening. When I started, I was like, okay, I'm going to explore these. Then I was flexitarian, and I remember eating plant-based at home, but then I would go back to, because I was living in Australia back then, so I'd go back to Spain, and I was still eating jamón serrano, the chicken and the rabbit in the paella, and many other things that I loved. And so it took me a long time to quit all of those. And I only did it because my heart told me to do so. So I was fully vegan for like a good 5 years. And now I'm at a stage where I don't resonate with the vegan label anymore. I definitely still want to and believe is the right way forward for the environment, and it's an incredibly healthy diet, and I follow it myself. But for example, if I go to someone's place and they've made a quiche and it contains egg, I'm a little bit less worried about that, because I've just sat with myself and gone, does that really bother me? Like, is it really impacting my overall approach to things, and am I being true to myself by eating a piece of quiche? I still think I am. So I'm just trying to be a little bit more flexible with myself because it just works better for me. I'm not saying this is the right way of doing things, but it just works better for me. And that has made me realize that back when I started in the movement, I wasn't allowing people to be who they are, and I wasn't meeting them where they are. And I think that's been hugely important at my role at Deliveroo, in the way I conducted myself in meetings with partners, in the way I conveyed data internally, which translated to product updates, trying to be more inclusive in the way we approach things. I think it's absolutely essential when it comes to diets.
Completely. Thank you for sharing that. It just sounds like a very reasonable and a more sustainable approach to changing your lifestyle, changing your diet, or changing the way you do things. We live in a world where sometimes we do really seem to focus on absolutism, all or nothing. You know, you're either this or you're not. And I think the reality is clearly somewhere in the middle, and we shouldn't criticize people for not being perfect or, you know, or messing up or getting halfway there. It's that thing, if everyone did 10% more, that would be great, than a small number of people doing 100%. Yeah, I love that, Elena.
In the vegan world, I think we've actually shot ourselves in the foot, because by pressuring people to go vegan, a lot of people haven't done it because it's a huge lifestyle change. So I think if we encourage more people to do better as opposed to being perfect, which frankly no one is, not even vegans, I think we'll go further. We still have to, I think, hold ourselves accountable and look at the data and the science. We can't ignore the fact that, I mean, based on my knowledge and what I think is the latest evidence, the plant-based diet is the best for the environment from an emissions perspective and water and land use. My thinking is, if you need to eat whatever you need to eat to then help you to sustain your plant-based habits long-term, do it. I think that's the way to go. There's nothing wrong about that. I don't think we're going to ever live, at least not you and I, in a vegan world. So the best everyone can do is already really great. That's where I'm standing right now, because that empowers individuals and that gives them the positivity and the optimism they need to keep pushing forward. If I'm telling you you're not doing it well, you're not 100% vegan, they might as well give up, because what's the point? You know what I mean? So that's how I try to approach things in business and in life as well at the moment.
I think it's a really healthy approach. Let's turn to your work now. So you've spent 5 years at Deliveroo, which is coming to an end. That must be an emotional time. How does that feel, stepping away from that family? It must feel a bit like, after that long.
It is definitely like leaving your boyfriend. It's been a ride. It's been an emotional ride. I joined in 2018 and I basically moved to London in 2018, and I started at Deliveroo a couple of months later after going traveling for a bit. So it's basically been home for me in London, and I've met such talented, incredible and inspiring individuals across so many different teams and orgs. And I think that's the most amazing thing at Deliveroo. It's people. Everyone is passionate about food. Everyone is determined to do a good job. There's team spirit, there's camaraderie. And when you're part of a startup that suddenly becomes this huge public company, and like being part of that ride, seeing people come and go, sitting in small rooms with people brainstorming, how do we approach this now? Change of strategy every 6 months or every year, because the market is so volatile, and we've been through COVID, we've been through Brexit, we've been through so much in the 5 years I've been at Deliveroo. It's genuinely been a privilege. I've learned so much, and ultimately I've been given the opportunity to find my place, I'm not going to say vocation because it's not my vocation, but find something I'm super passionate about and be able to be creative with it. Because I think something that's great about the Deliveroo culture is that if you have an idea and you can back it with data and you're proactive and you want to bring it to life, they're most likely going to allow you to do it, which is not the case in many companies. So that was my experience. I had great leaders as well supporting me and guiding me through difficult decisions. And I'm ready to close this chapter, but I don't think I'll ever forget it. And it's taught me amazing lessons professionally and personally.
Thank you for sharing that. There's something I want to pick up on there, because I get the sense that you kind of created this role for yourself, this vegan category lead at Deliveroo. I think a lot of people would look at that and say, what a dream job. I didn't see that advertised, or whatever. How did you go about that process of moving from an account management role to then really putting forward this idea that you need to have some vegan category leadership and support delivery partners with their plant-based options? Take us back to that whole thing.
Yeah. So again, it stemmed from a personal pain of being a Deliveroo consumer and not being able to trust. This was back in 2018, so very early days for delivery, for plant-based. But I remember moving to London and I had never really used delivery a couple of times in Australia, but I wasn't a consumer. Then I became one. And it was very hard to find, maybe not to find, but to trust that what you were ordering was actually going to be vegetarian or plant-based or vegan. And so I joined Deliveroo as a senior account manager in the core London team, managing relationships with some of our biggest restaurant partners. And the role of an account manager is to help businesses optimize their operations and grow their sales, right? So as part of that growth proposition, there was a very interesting pillar that no one was looking at, which was diets and sustainability. Yes, it was starting to become part of the conversation, but it wasn't part of every business plan. And so I remember I was working with the likes of Burger, Lobster, Hakkasan, Nobu, like very high-profile brands that had the financial capacity to potentially invest in new ventures and explore and innovate. And I'm not saying those were the brands that necessarily adopted this. They were open to it, but it was more like I was starting to test how people reacted to this new idea of how about creating a couple of vegetarian plant-based options in your menu, which will allow you to tap into new consumer groups that you're not currently talking to. Ultimately, for me, business is about communication, right? It's communicating with the different consumer groups and selling them a specific proposition that you do better than anyone. So you can still do amazing meat burgers, but if you're including a couple of vegetarian and vegan options, you're telling the young generations that care about the environment, the people that have health needs, the parents that are concerned about their kids, I don't know, you're telling all those people, hey, there's a place for you here as well. So it's not even necessarily just about the incremental revenue opportunity that these options bring. It's more about the message you're sending out to consumers saying, hey, yes, we focus on this and we're experts in meat and fish, but there's a place for you here as well. And I don't think there's a better message a brand can send out than you're welcome here. So I started testing out those messages externally and internally, because obviously that was a journey as well. But I remember back then, my manager at the time, his name is Spencer Walker, I basically put it to him and I said, look, I think there's a great opportunity here. We didn't have the right data back then because of the lack of consistent tagging. It was hard to actually get the right numbers, but we had enough to prove that there was an opportunity internally. So I created a business plan presenting basically a case for me to start improving the consumer experience side of things and then the B2B proposition externally. So I just started creating materials that were useful for our internal teams and for our partners. And then doing a bit more commercial forecasting and essentially trying to understand, is there a real opportunity here? How can we use this to not only drive our commercial agenda, but also position us ahead of competition? And I think this is where it gets really interesting as well. All these niche opportunities are ultimately a way to differentiate brands from, everyone else out there. So we believed in it, they believed in me, and we kept pushing it forward. And I slowly transitioned to a hybrid role of senior account manager and vegan category lead. And what I did was I continued looking after the more high-profile brands, but I also took on our fully vegan partners, so the likes of Neat Burger, Mildred's, Uwi, etc. And then little by little, it just became obvious that there was a lot of interest across our national account brands, across our grocery partners as well when we created that side of the business. So then it was just the natural jump to head of vegan. And it wasn't easy, I must say that. I've had to fight a lot internally because I think I mean, anyone working in a big or small company really know that prioritizing is everything, right? And sometimes there's great ideas and there's great intentions, but you have to be able to allocate resources towards the areas of the business that need it the most. And that's not always necessarily the most sustainable or the best thing to do for the people and the planet. So it took a lot of effort and influencing. I'd say that's a word that resonates with me a lot. I've had to do a lot of influencing internally and externally, but it was clear that brands were and continue to be excited about this space, and it's not going anywhere. So I think it was a no-brainer for Deliveroo as well, because ultimately we took the lead in the space and none of our other competitors were, in my opinion, close to where we were. So it was incredible.
Very interesting. You've mentioned how you've been managed and led a couple of times now. What do you think managers listening to this can learn from the way that you were managed when you came forward with this new proposition, this new idea?
I've got a mantra inside of me always, which is tame your eagerness. Because I'm a very passionate person and I come up with an idea and straight away I want to bring it to life. And that's amazing. And it's really important, especially in a startup world, a fast-moving industry or company. But you need to get it right. You need the right data. You need the right story to tell internally and externally. You need the right forecasting. You need the right partners or stakeholders on board. So I think patience is a very important skill in business and in life, frankly, that my managers have taught me and that I've learned along the way. And then I'd say, the more I reflect on this, because I've been doing a lot of reflecting recently, I think being human is arguably the most important side of a manager because, yes, obviously the technical abilities are important and the commercial understanding is important and being able to communicate effectively is key and building relationships with clients, all of those things have to be there. But for someone like me, for instance, that I don't need necessarily someone to push me. Of course, I'm always learning more technical skills, but you learn that on the job. I think what you need from your manager is someone that you know is there for you and that has your back. And if you have a question, you can be vulnerable and be like, I don't know how to do this, or what's the best way to position this. If your team don't feel comfortable coming to you openly and saying, I feel shit today, I'm not going to work, I'll come back to it tomorrow, I don't understand this situation, or what do you think is the best approach? How should I position this for this stakeholder? For me, it's as a team member, it was always like, come with everything ready. Make it easy for your manager to give you direction. And for managers, be human. Obviously, think about business needs and commercial outcomes, but ultimately, what does this person as an individual need right now? Even though it might not be the best for the business, sometimes you need to allow people a little bit more time to develop into their full potential. And I think that's what I've had at Deliveroo as well. I've been given time and permission to learn. And this doesn't happen everywhere. And I think that's what a lot of companies get wrong. You can't expect someone, especially in markets that are still very new and young, give people a bit of space to learn and make mistakes. And, with certain things, start small. You're not going to give someone the opportunity to fail going public throughout an IPO, but there's small projects that people can manage. And when they prove to themselves that they're able to bring it to life, they see their potential, then they just grow into much better workers and humans. So I'd say, yes, obviously share the technical and the business side of things with your team, but be human.
I think that's great advice.
How do you feel about that? Do you agree?
Oh, 100%. I agree with that. Yeah. I think what you were describing there was giving people psychological safety, being able to create a space where people can bring their whole selves to work if they want to. Maybe they don't want to bring their whole self to work. Lots of people don't like that doing. I'm very much a bring my whole self to work type of guy. And then the patience, I also think, is a great one. So being able to encourage your team with ideas, but temper it in a way where you're going to give them the best chance of succeeding with that idea rather than rushing it. I think that's very insightful. And it's given me a good segue, actually, Elena, because there was something else I wanted to talk to you about. You've seen a culture grow and change in the way that as you add presumably hundreds of people, to this business, you look to support the team around issues that may come up And I saw on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago that you shared something quite personal around PMS. This is an issue that I'm becoming more and more aware of with my male privilege hat, lighting up and going, wow, I didn't realize really that women were dealing with this kind of thing. So I'd love if you could talk about that, how that issue has become particularly pertinent to you, how you saw it dealt with at Deliveroo, whether that was good or bad, and what more we need to do in the business world around that.
Thank you so much for asking this question. I think it has to be talked about in personal and professional life a lot more because there's lots of different issues impacting women, but I think it's roughly 20% of us that deal with some kind of these issues, and maybe a lot more in lower degrees, but most of us at least have a cycle, and that directly impacts how we feel and how we are able to behave and think and produce. And I think this is directly linked with productivity. I'm not a menstrual cycle expert, so I'll just share from my personal experience, but I was on the pill for 11 years and I quit in 2020, and that completely transformed me as an individual. Essentially, the way I explain this, my hormones and my emotions were cancelled for 11 years. I was always fine. I was happy, I was great, I was okay, energetic. But then I quit, and then I started experiencing insane highs and lows, emotionally, physically, until things adjusted. But I still, to this day, really struggle in the lead up to my period. And then I'm lucky enough that my period is not too long, but a couple of days a month I have really strong pain. What this means for me in my professional life is that there's a couple of days per month where my brain feels cloudy and foggy. And for me, it's 2 days per month. For some people, it might be a week. I've heard of women that struggle even up to 2 weeks per month. It's very challenging. It's very challenging because as a woman, you're already struggling with imposter syndrome many times and competition and cultural structures that prevent us many times from accessing the same opportunities as other people. And then add this on top, the guilt. There's a lot emotionally and psychologically that happens. So for me, it's been life-changing having managers, male managers actually, that I've been able to speak very openly about this with, because I've brought this to the table. So I encourage everyone here to have a conversation. If you're a male leading teams with women, ask them. Feel free to come to me. If this is an issue for you, just tell me. And equally, if you're a woman and you've never brought this up with your manager and you struggle with it, do it. Why do we feel empowered to say, I've got a cold, I'm not going to work today, but not, I've got my period, I can't think, I'm not going to work today? I know why, but we need to break these taboos and start having these conversations more often. So for me, I started learning a lot about cycles and about what was happening to me. And I realized that it was just 1 or 2 days per month that I needed a bit of space. And for me, this means instead of starting at 9, I might start at 10:30. And that's okay, because in the afternoon I feel great and I still am productive, which is what most companies are looking for, right? And if not, the day after. Like for me, actually, it's like what I was saying with eating plant-based. If allowing a bit of space allows you to then go 3,000% when you're feeling good, why not? If eating a piece of cake today allows you to then stay plant-based most of the time, do it. So it's finding the right balance for everyone and respecting that everyone has different rhythms and paces. And you are male, and the fact that you don't experience it doesn't mean it's not important or it's not happening. So I think back to the inclusivity point, let's try and learn as much as we can about these issues, help the women in our lives and the women in our workplaces, and simply create spaces where people feel comfortable talking about how they feel. And if they need an afternoon, please, let's give it to them, because they'll give it back. I can guarantee you they'll give it back.
Fantastic. Great rallying cry. I know it's your native Spain that is, I think, the first European country to introduce menstrual leave. I think it's 3 days per month.
I mean, there's a lot of controversy, as you can imagine.
Yeah, of course.
We had an event at Deliveroo a few months ago where we discussed, that's when I shared my personal experience with it. But there were a couple of women from one of the, I think it was Cyclo, a menstrual tracking app. And they were saying, as a woman, if you go onto your leave platform and on the drop down, you see there's menstrual leave, you might not even take it, but knowing that it's there, it just The same as seeing the vegan option on your menu. It sends the right message. It tells you that your company cares about you. They understand this is a safe space and you can be you. And that's what it's all about. I've never, honestly, I'm telling you this, and I think I've taken in 5 years, 3 afternoons off. And I really struggle with PMS. So it's about knowing that I can do it, and then I manage my time around it. It might just boil down to starting an hour late. Who cares? Sometimes you get stuck in the tube and it's the same, but it's about being able to say it. I think that's what makes the whole difference.
That is a great way of looking at it. At Standing on Giants, we introduced personal days a couple of years ago now, and I think it's very much the same thing. Just knowing that you can take a day without any real explanation as to why you need it initially is a real comfort, for whatever you might need it for, mental health or other personal reasons. Fantastic, Elena. Thank you for sharing all of that. I really appreciate your vulnerability and honesty on that one.
Thanks for asking.
Love learning about this stuff. One final question in the work section, because you should tell us what you're up to next. So you're leaving Deliveroo. What's the next chapter look like?
So I still can't share a lot, but I'm going to stay in the plant-based space more or less part-time. So I've got a personal business that I'm a meditation teacher in Spanish, and I have my own podcast. So that's what I'm going to be doing part-time. But I love this space. I love food. I love plant-based, and I'm still very much committed to helping the space move forward and help the right businesses continue to grow and connect with the right consumers. So I'm going to be working with a group of amazing individuals in this industry. And together we're going to be working in private consulting and then do some stuff for the industry as a whole that I think is going to be groundbreaking, that I think is very much needed, and that hopefully will be very helpful for a wide range of businesses. So if anyone listening needs a bit of help with their plant-based proposition or strategy in the UK market, they can reach out.
So we're coming into the last section of the conversation now. Some really interesting topics we've covered. So we want to lift ourselves out of your day-to-day and more thinking about the world at large. And if there was a little bit radical change for the world that you would like people to get behind, what would that be?
I'm not sure if this is what people might expect to hear, but I would just say if everyone meditated every day for 10 to 20 minutes, I swear to God, this place would be a much better place. Because I think, and this is something I'm trying to figure out still, but again, from my own personal experience, I think if we genuinely want to change people's habits, we first need to help them make the click and connect with the why. Why do you eat less meat? Why do you meditate? Why do you treat people better? Why are you inclusive? Why do you educate yourself on women's issues when they don't necessarily impact you directly, although they do? I think we need to take a step back and help people connect with themselves. We live in such a fast-paced, especially in London, environment, and in business as well. Everything is for now, and results and numbers and growth and productivity, and we're not allowing minutes. I'm not even talking about an hour a day to go for a walk, which many people don't even include in their day, but I'm talking about 5 to 10 minutes to just sit in silence and allow yourself to process a bit of what's going on in your life. That can radically change the way people treat themselves and treat others, behave and conduct themselves in business, and ultimately treat the planet, which is what the plant-based movement is all about as well. So I think if everyone meditated every day and we treated each other a little bit better and ourselves, and we connected with the most, it's clear that it's a theme throughout this conversation and in my life, but I'm very much focused on the human side of things, because I think that's the building block for everything else. Without the human side, I mean, we've seen great businesses succeed without necessarily taking care of that human side. But for me, the genuinely great, inspiring businesses that have followers and supporters for life are the ones that take care of their human side. So yeah, let's be a bit more radical, but also a little bit more human, please.
I love that. It's a very regular theme of the podcast, Elena. And in fact, I've been having some conversations recently with leaders who have focused on employee well-being. And someone said to me the other day, ultimately, if you don't have people, you don't have a business. So it's that simple. So Elena, we're at the end of our conversation now. And the last question is always the same, which is, there's someone out there listening to you who's inspired about how you implemented your little bit radical ideas over your career. What advice would you give them to get their idea off the ground if they don't know where to start?
I'd say make sure that anything you're working on or wanting to bring to life genuinely sparks the fire inside of you, because the amount of hours, dedication, struggles you're going to have to go through to bring your business or your project to life inside a company, whether you're an entrepreneur or work within a company, you really need that connection to what you're doing. And it goes back to finding your why. It's great to do things for the sake of learning and experiencing, testing new sides of the business. But if you really want to bring something to life long term, make sure you love it and you're passionate about it. And once you know you love it, back it with data. Like, we need more evidence. I still see this in the plant-based space as well. We're talking about, oh, it's good for the planet, it's good for the animal. More numbers and more clear, pragmatic ways of understanding and approaching business scenarios. So I'd say passion and numbers.
Passion and numbers. I love it. That reminds me of our very first podcast episode we had with Elizabeth Oster from Heineken. She's a fantastic leader. You said something very, very similar. How to get to the one number that's going to convince everyone. Elena, thank you so much for joining us today. Hope the new venture goes well. I'm sure it will. And hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please follow us on your podcast platform. If you'd like to appear on A Little Bit Radical or have an idea of someone we should speak to, please email podcast@standingongiants.com or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. You can search Rob Fawkes or search Standing on Giants and you'll find me there. Thank you very much and speak to you next time.